Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us bright and early on the fourth morning of our week-long Governance for Schools conference this September. My name is Ward Durham. I am the head of Key Accounts and London Operations of Charity Governance for Schools, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Amelia Taylor from our partners at PwC, who will be delivering today's session on cyber security as essentials and things that you need to know. As school governors and school leaders. If we could pull up the slides before we get started, there's just a few pieces of housekeeping to go through. So for anyone attending that would like to utilise them, closed captions are available for this meeting. Our speakers have been invited to share a short verbal description of themselves. So for the benefit of anyone that may be visually impaired, I am white male. I'm in my mid-30s. I have short dark brown hair, wearing sort of black, quite skinny framed glasses, and I've got a green and white checked shirt on in front of the Governance for Schools background. The chat function for today is disabled, so please do enter any questions using the question and answer panel. If you're disconnected at all during the session, please just rejoin the session. The session is being recorded and links to the video will be sent out, and we'll also send links to resources from the session. Unfortunately, today we're not able to share the slides that we'll be using today, but we will have the recording of the session, and we will send out some useful resources to help you go back to your schools with and look at cyber security within your school. Please do continue to follow the conference and like and share content on social media using our hashtag GFSconference21 hashtag. Lots of the sessions that happened earlier this week and now have now been recorded and can be watched back. So if there's anything that you've missed, please do go and check those out. They're all available on our website, and we'd be really grateful if, following the session today, you could complete the short post-session survey. I'm now delighted to hand over to Amelia, who works in the cybersecurity team at our partners at PwC, who has kindly agreed to share her expertise in this matter with you all. Thank you, Amelia.
Thanks, Will. So before we get started, I'll do a description of myself. So I am a white female with brown hair. I am wearing a grey jumper, and I am in my mid to late 20s. I don't know where it sits on 27. It could go either way, but brilliant. Next slide, please. Great, so just looking at the agenda today, so we'll go over an introduction and just a brief overview of cyber, then looking at the threat landscape that is present for schools, and then the role that school governors should have within the different committees and boards you sit on, then thinking about personal security, what are the steps and key things that you should be thinking about, and then just close and any questions and answers for you guys. Brilliant. Next slide, please. So we can skip that one. Great. So the first thing I wanted to speak about is just around what is cybersecurity. And when we're thinking about cybersecurity, it is how do we prevent successful cyber attacks, which is very important. But I think the key thing here is you can't prevent every cyber attack. So it's important to be resilient. And how do you respond and recover when you are attacked? So it's actually thinking about, although you can have all the different procedures, all the different controls in place, no matter what, you can't prevent everything. There's always different techniques attackers are going to come up against. So actually, how do you become resilient to those cyber attacks? Next page, please. Thank you. So next, it's about being on a journey. So when you go back to your boards, it's having a think around where are we in that journey. So first, you've got awareness, and then you want to move to how do we understand this the cyber risks that we face, and do we have any good governance in place? I would expect not a lot of you will have that within your sessions at the moment, but then it's how do you move to that effective leadership? Or have you got metrics or anything around it? And when we're getting to that effective leadership, it's actually how do you turn your value protection, so just you're using cybersecurity to protect yourself, to can you use it to create value for your schools as well? So that could be through innovation, it could be through customer engagement, it could be through staff productivity. There's different ways to use cybersecurity to actually create value rather than just creating protection. Next page, please. We can skip through that one and go straight to the different threats. Great. So when we're thinking about key threats that are present at the moment in cyber, one of the key ones we're thinking about always is ransomware. And ransomware is probably the biggest threat that is faced by organizations at the moment. There are various techniques that are being used. Sorry, one second. Sorry. I'm just trying to get my notes above the, there we go. Brilliant. Sorry about that. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment is ransomware. This is the biggest threat that's kind of facing organizations at the moment. And there's a huge amount of focus actually from law enforcement and national agencies and how we should be dealing with them at a national level. But it's very, very difficult because there's a constant change in how different threats are being used against organizations. The next one we talk about is supply chains, and that is any different software, any different organization that you are using. So do you know, as well as yourself, all of the different organizations and how they could impact your environment as well? There have been quite a number of high-profile incidents because of supply chain threats, and these have come in a variety of forms, such as coming through software compromises. So do you know what software you have? And probably one of the biggest things and why it's been difficult for different organizations to mitigate this is because there's been a lack of effective good practices within the organizations. So it's actually thinking back again to that cyber resilience point and how can we put in good controls to mitigate when we are attacked, and thinking about that. Next, if we think about different threat actors, and in current affairs at the moment, what we're seeing is they are exploiting our interest and anxieties over different issues. So we're seeing a lot of phishing attacks that could have been due to COVID. So people are making payments because they're getting texts through around vaccines, for example, or COVID masks, lots of different things like that in the news. And attackers are getting a lot bolder in how they engage their targets. So that could be using social media, they could be finding your personal information, so that's your email, your phone number, and attacking that way. They are creating fake recruiters profiles for jobs, for example, and all of those different things. So it's how do you address that when there's ever-changing threats? They're going to use social engineering to actually try and understand more about the people they are attacking, and then use that to their advantage. So it's not always an easy way because there's ever changing, but it's just kind of understanding what are the things in the news right now and going from that. If we go to the next page, please. So next one is just to comment on, so ransomware, as we've said, is the biggest threat that we're seeing at the moment. So that is human operated as well. So we're just here is just to show how much it's risen in the current year, just looking at, they're seeing that as it's a lot easier to get revenue that way rather than other attacks that we generally see. So that's the one that if you were going back to your board looking at ransomware first and how you can address that risk would be ideal. Next page, please. So again, this is just talking about the emerging threat landscape. So we mentioned around COVID. So these are different attacks that we have seen on that kind of social engineering, people manipulating people because of the current situation. So we saw COVID documents that have been dropped and sent to people. I'm sure lots of people got texts around different phishing emails trying to get people to either buy stuff, sign up for their vaccine via that way. And it's the criminals are getting very quick to adapt at the moment, and that is thinking about malware. So are you using different malware to actually fit like phishing kits and downloading packages? So do you have any of that? And actually, do you know if that's secure? So when you are thinking about buying malware, if that software is then attacked by these malicious organizations, which it has in the past. So one of the attacks we've seen in recent time was on malware, and they used legitimate interactive maps developed by a university to cover for dropping malware into that pack. So you just have to be very careful when you're looking at what software. Are you sure that it is secure? There's a lot of it's probably looking at that top right of the software to make sure that you know that it's good technology rather than just something new that's come onto the market. When we're talking about phishing examples, so our threat intel research team has uncovered a mixture of espionage and cybercrime activity from lots of different threat actors capitalizing on COVID-19. Cybercriminals and espionage threat actors have uncovered lots of phishing lures as part of their efforts to infect victims with malware and gain access to their infrastructure. This is mainly using social engineering techniques and also luring and different malicious apps that have been copying legitimate content to enhance their authenticity. There also has been many sophisticated ransomware attacks. They were very, very active in 2020, looking at highly targeted attacks against large organizations. And although these methods can vary, they rely mainly on malicious spam. So when you're getting emails, make sure that you're checking the email address, for example, because checking that it's not a malicious message. Next page, please. Have we skipped over one? Yeah, there we go. So this is just to say this ransomware attacks do happen for schools. So if we talk about the Texas school district that was hit by a ransomware incident, they actually ended up paying out $2.3 million because of a ransomware attack. This ransomware attack was called Revel, which was also known as Sodin. I don't think I can pronounce it, but Sodini Kibi, which was a ransomware affiliate program that was launched in May 2019. They used different aliases and were from the Russian-speaking criminal marketplace. And there was also, just to give another example of a recent ransomware attack, 6 different schools in the Isle of Wight that were attacked and almost had to pay, but I think they decided not to at the time. Next page, please. So this is just to talk about what is the reality of responding and recovering. So when we talk about that resilience again, so first, if we talk about paying the ransom, the most important thing here is to get legal advice. Some actors can be on sanctioned lists, so it's actually illegal to transact with them. So be very careful if this happens to you. Always very important to get legal advice first. If we go to relying on insurance next, you need to consider it is a silent cover-up policy. It's a little bit like kidnapping. So just be aware of nation state attacks that you might want to consider, should you be using your insurance or should you not? So the realities of a recovery. It's very difficult sometimes to decrypt after you have been attacked, so it can be very slow and very manual. Some of the data may be corrupt and not recoverable at all. So it is important that you have those controls in place, and for example, having data recovery disaster recovery processes and cyber resilience processes, so that is avoidable. Next one around engaging with regulators. Given the data loss angle, you need to be prepared to defend past actions to avoid fines. We've seen lots of fines. For example, British Airways is a good example of that, where they were fined quite a significant amount of money because they were not able to recover all that data, and regulators want to investigate what happened. Next, around managing recovery. It's difficult to do that. You obviously won't have the resources to do that. So how do you handle that recovery, and how many days are you going to lose within the business, and are you going to have to bring in other organizations to help with that? So it can take 3 days normally to figure out what we're going to do, and then probably 3 weeks to mobilize a team, and typically 3 months to recover. And last one on this page, so how do we make IT securable? So this is all around having the technologies, the controls and the people in place to help. So attackers will exploit all the vulnerabilities in old IT tech normally, and looking at, so what we need to do is look at what modern security tools can you get in place, and are some of your security tools that you're using actually not fit for purpose? Are they not going to detect if a malicious attacker is coming into your organization? Next page, please. So this is just looking at the broader impacts of cybercrime. So you have your direct costs, which could be your investigating and remediation, looking at regulatory sanctions and customer and business redress. So in your customer, that could be either kind of the government or your local council, or actually could that be parents, for example, and you've got to go back to your board and answer to them as well. Then we're talking about indirect costs, which could be an increase in cyber insurance if you have that. Looking at fraud, so could there be any, could the malicious attacker use any of that data to conduct fraud? Then any class actions lawsuits from, for example, if a group of parents wanted to sue or anything like that. And then the intangible costs. So what would the reputational impact be on your school? Looking at, could people potentially lose their jobs? So would the head teacher or someone within the board of governors lose their jobs? And then as well, if, for example, if you're in a school and someone wanted to join and make an academy, would that, if that was something that you wanted, would the academy or company that was considering buying the school decide, actually, no, we don't want to do this anymore? Next page, please. And again. So key questions when you're going to your board and having discussions around cybersecurity. So I think it'd be good to challenge and actually think about, what are we doing for a strategy? So what are your top cyber risks? Do you have them written down anywhere? Have you got any views on a digital strategy? And how confident are you that you understand those cyber risks within your school? And then looking at the ownership. So within the different committees that you have, do you have a resources committee, and do you look at cyber within that? Do you look at technology within that? How much do you talk about cybersecurity and the controls that you have? Do you understand any of the vulnerabilities or weaknesses that you have? Do you understand your supply chain and that third-party risk that might be present? If we talk about financial resilience, so for your school, what would be your risk appetite? If you had a cyber attack, how much would you be willing to pay? Do you think that that could be any money? So it's considering how much are we willing to lose, and then putting controls in place that mitigate over that amount. Then we're thinking about accountability. So what's the responsibility of the governors? Who is responsible for cyber risk management? If an incident takes place, whose responsibility is that? Who's going to take ownership? Have you got any roles in place for that? Then talking about assurance, do you have any internal audits that are done over the school to say, yeah, we're happy that they've got the right controls in place? Do you have any other assurance, whether that's within the school or independent? Have you got any compliance frameworks, and actually do you know what you need to comply to? And then reporting, so thinking about what is your risk position and how you're going to report that to the board. Brilliant. Next page, please. So obviously we were just talking about reporting, and so what are good cybersecurity metrics? It is important to have these in place to effectively govern cyber risk. And if we talk about different ways of governance, so we first have reactive governance. This involves challenging the board on the metrics in progress. This does not require a good knowledge of the risk. And then if we talk about proactive governance, this would involve the board considering the cyber risks in every major business decision. And this would require a good understanding of the risks that are present within your schools. The business decisions can change the attack service, which leave the school board playing whack-a-mole, which is why risks can be stuck on amber and red for quite a while. Obviously, we've mentioned that there is a ever-changing supply chain and environment around different threats that are going to be present. So it is just making sure that you are keeping up to date. And as we've kind of mentioned on the page, so understanding what that attack service is, looking at the different controls that you have in place, and then how would you respond to an incident and the ever-changing threat landscape. If we go into the next page, please. So I don't want to labour on this point a bit, but this is just looking at, okay, how mature is your school within governing cybersecurity? If I'm honest, I don't think you fully need to go to level 3, but actually being proactive on ownership and quantifying your exposure and kind of getting to that level 2. So it's about being preventing and being prepared. If you can get to level 3, that's great, but I think for schools, I think it's perfectly acceptable to kind of get to that level 2. So when we're thinking about strategy, being aware of the risk and versus the scrutiny to ensure that preparedness is made to cope with the breaches, and then versus understanding the business impact, setting risk appetite, and being part of those business decisions that you're having within your different committees and board. Then when we're thinking about board ownership, so you need to react to issues presented and educate yourself in understanding and help setting priorities, and then also understanding your position within cyber risk to help inform those decisions that you're making. So we mentioned financial resilience before, but that's looking at appreciating that the impact of an incident could be based on public cases, and also quantifying the different scenarios that are going to impact based on either experts' opinions or a quantification exercise. There's different ways to do this. Then when we're looking at accountability, so who is accountable if a cybersecurity event happens? Would that be the head teacher? Would that be someone else within the board? Looking at that accountability. And then with assurance, it's are you marking your own homework? Do you fully understand? Do you need someone external to do an assessment, any testing, to understand all the risks, whether that's on your supply chain? Do you need to stress test anything? Do you want to understand more around that financial resilience? And then when we think about reporting, so doing kind of acid tests for what is your true state of governance. It's difficult sometimes looking at a good practice on this, but there's definitely emerging areas to share that. And then also just thinking about cyber insurance, should that be something that if you don't have, should you get that? And actually, do you need, one of the considerations that I've been having conversations with clients at the moment, looking at your cover versus having effective controls in place. So when you're considering insurance versus controls and how you balance that money out, is in just having that conversation around kind of that financial resilience and what do we want to pay for? Do we care more about the data that we held and if that's lost? So do you need effective controls because that's more important, or is actually the money more important in thinking about things like that? Next page, please. So again, this is just looking kind of in depth at the Marsh report in a bit more detail, and how are you going to engage your board for this? So can you measure over time? So when we're thinking about the minimum standard versus best practice, I think we should all be aiming for the minimal standard, that we are challenging the board to understand the strategy, the ownership, and understand the financial resilience. And so we want that accountability and the assurance, and probably some reporting within the committees and different board meetings that you have. But it's understanding how much do you challenge and have controls around, but you also want productivity at the same time. Thanks. Next page. So this is just how regulators look at key risks. So they look at the accountability and culture and those responsibilities within the organisation. They look at the risks that are present for cyber. They will also look at third-party management. So that's again around the supply chain risk, incident management, cyber resilience, and how you share information. So when we're thinking about what risks do we need to be thinking about, there are some key kind of high-level topics that you can probably bring at thinking about, okay, what is our accountability and culture risks, and thinking like that way. Next page, please. So these are some key takeaways for your different schools. So what is your exposure to cyber risk? Try honing down into that. Then looking at, do you want a cybersecurity framework or an approach to cybersecurity? Then thinking about what capabilities and resources do you need to mitigate that exposure that you have? And then thinking about, do you want to do any independent reviews or testing on that? Then again, being prepared. So how prepared are you for incidents, and how are you going to prove that you're prepared? What is your track record for that? And then thinking about how are you going to enforce this awareness across your school? So is there active contribution, and how do the teachers know about, how do the pupils, how do you bring that all together within your different schools? And then consider the legal and regulatory environment as well. So what are the fines that could face your different schools, and looking at it like that. And then the most important things, and the things I want to see from all of you, is challenge the board, and really understand, is the response that you have adequate, and are you evolving to meet those constant different threats that are evolving within cybersecurity. Next page, please. So now we go on to personal security. We did have a video that will be shared afterwards. Unfortunately, the video capabilities are not working today, so it's that video will be looking at how private is your personal information, so that will be shared afterwards. So if we go on to why a cyber criminal might target you. Now, this might not be relevant, all of it, but I think it's important to get that holistic view. So consider the following when you're thinking about your school. So accessing sensitive data, as we know, schools hold a lot of sensitive data. So thinking about what data you hold, where do you hold it? Is that physical on papers? I can imagine there's a lot of things printed out, as well as what different systems, technologies are you holding that data on, and is it secure? And then looking at foreign travel, which for most of you I don't think will be relevant. And then are there any links to any different organizations? Looking at, do you sometimes delegate access? So can the head teacher delegate access to someone else, etc., etc.? Is there any public interest within any of your schools? Have you been in the news recently? Anything like that? Looking at time pressured. So have you got, are you merging with another school? Is there anything happening like that? Is it where exams results are being released, and actually you need to get that data back so kids can know what results they've got, anything like that. And then looking at kind of authority to act, which would be, what are you responsible for? And then a low digital confidence. So how mature is your organization within digital? Have you got good processes around it? I'd probably say the few ones here that are probably the greatest interest for you are looking at that sensitive data and the low digital confidence. So next, if we just talk about how might you be targeted, so on the next page, sorry. So when we're looking at here, it's looking at the different attacks. So I won't read them all in full, but so phishing attacks, this is common. So that could be looking to get your sensitive information. So I'm sure many of us have got either emails or text messages, etc., that have asked you from your bank or whatever to put in your details, your credit card number, etc., and it looks trustworthy, but it is not. And then one of the other ones I think that was key that we spoke about earlier today as well is baiting. So looking at malware infected devices. So that could be just on a USB. Someone puts that USB into one of your computers within your schools, and that takes down the rest of the school. That could just be in something like an elevator within your school, for example. So it appears legitimate, but it's not. Great. Next page, please. So this is just a tip. So this is a website called Have I Been Pawned? So you can put your email addresses in to see if any of the email addresses have experienced a data breach. One thing to be aware of here is just be sensitive when you're sharing this. Obviously, you could probably see that. So if you put your email address in, it could show up any websites that you have an account with. So obviously, sometimes people may have access or accounts to things they may not personally like to share. So I'd just be careful when you're doing that. Maybe don't share all that information and keep it within the board level. Next page, please. So these are just some personal security tips to be aware of. So be streetwise. First things, have a separate account. So you probably don't use your school email address on your home computer, split that out. And make sure that anyone within your family or friends that you're also sharing computers with, they're safe online too. Sometimes potentially consider giving false information when registering to online services if there isn't a valid reason that they actually need your information. So next, if we talk about emails address, so if you don't recognize the email address, probably don't open or forward or respond to them. Look at where the email has come from. You can hover over and look at links. So don't just click on the link straight away. If you don't trust the email address, probably don't open any attachments. And you can also report phishing attacks to either your school IT or your email provider. So if you are using a computer on the move, use a privacy screen if you have access to one. Don't leave your device unattended, and potentially use things like VPN when you're using publicly shared Wi-Fi. These are probably things you're hearing before, so I'm sorry if I'm labouring on the point, but I think they're key tips when you're kind of moving around. So next page, please. Go back one, please. Yeah. Oh, wait. There should be two of these. No. I'll just speak for the other ones. I don't know why that's good, but anyway, so other security tips is around social networking. So when you're on social media, avoid disclosing lots of personal information about yourself and your families within your profile. Look at the privacy settings that you've got. So restrict those profiles, including your access and your address book. Be aware of the different contacts that you have and implement restrictions on their profiles if you need to, and review the privacy notices of those different social organizations as well. Then if we go on to authentication, so never tell anyone your password. Think about having a longer password, normally longer than 8 characters. And one of the things I suggest, so this is my area of expertise, so probably use a phrase. So something like Mary has a little lamb, maybe put some numbers in there. Something that is, if it's longer but it's easy to remember, it's a lot harder for a attacker to figure that out. The longer it is, the longer it takes for an attacker to generate that. And then try not to reuse passwords for multiple accounts. And the last one is around two-factor authentication. So I'm sure a lot of you have had a text message sent to your phone, or like we use biometrics on our iPhones, for example. Use that if you can. And then the last one is around antivirus. So make sure that you have antivirus installed on your laptops and your different devices, and set them to scan all files and folders periodically. and looking at making sure that they're doing automatic updates, so then you don't have to take that personally onto yourself. So next one we'll set, so we're on that page already, sorry. Key resources that we're going to share after. So considerations for school governors themselves. So that is shared by the National Cybersecurity Centre, and their key questions for school governors. I think this is quite a lot of information. So if you use that, and then also how do you advise important cyber choices for your pupils? So that's come from the National Crime Agency. So how can you take that into either education programs or through, I was going to use the word marketing, it might not be the right word, but can you put different flyers around your school, for example, to make your pupils make better choices with regards to cybersecurity? Brilliant, next page. So thank you. And before we go on, so just some key takeaways. So being aware, so understanding what your cyber risk is and where you are on that journey at the moment, understand those threats and what your school is exposed to, looking at, do you need the right MI, so the different metrics to be reported to your different committees or boards, and understanding your regulatory compliance needs, and taking steps to secure yourself and your pupils against attacks. So I will open it out to questions.
Thank you so much, Amelia. That was absolutely fascinating. So much fascinating information in there. I know just from a phishing point of view, just to highlight, how sophisticated they are. All organisations can be vulnerable to this. I know at governance of schools, we often get emails. Well, not often, but we quite often get emails from, fortunate to be from our CEO, asking us to buy vouchers, to thank you, to go to websites and buy vouchers as a thank you. I wouldn't be surprised if we all got an email after this conference asking us to buy vouchers to thank all of our wonderful speakers that have kindly come along and share their expertise, just like Amelia has done this morning. There's a few questions that have popped in as we've been going along, Amelia. One question is if we're using cloud storage, should we not be able to recover data or information assets from the last backup? With 3 days seeming like a long time. In your view, how will AI impact traditional cybersecurity?
So with regards to backup, if you're using cloud storage, it depends what the attack is. So not every attack is the same. So if it was a software attack on that cloud provider, it could take, and I'm not saying that it's definitely 3 days for every single attack. That was just kind of an estimate on, this is kind of tend to be what we've seen when, so we have a incident response team, and that's just a kind of average, but definitely it varies. Some organizations can get attacked and recover straight away because they have the right data, disaster recovery and cyber resilience processes. So totally agree on that point. I think the area around AI and it actually, you've got kind of two factors, that it can help with a lot of controls, but also it can increase the risk because that's increasing your attack surface as well. So if you are using anything around AI, actually understanding what does that mean for your school as well.
Thank you very much. There's a question here that's saying, from someone involved with a very small school, and then obviously it's an issue that we need to be aware of, but in reality, the majority of schools won't have people with the level of knowledge talked about today. Do you have any tips on how schools can move to more proactive governance of these issues when they're generally only keeping on top of our statutory requirements?
Yeah, and I completely get that. I'm not saying you need to bring in and have a 10-man cybersecurity team. I think it's just being aware of the risk. I recognise that there's going to be a lot of people here with schools that, like 100 people or less maybe, that you don't need to have all of these things in place, but it's how do you mitigate that is relevant to your school. So obviously there's probably schools that have got 10,000 people versus 100 people. It's very big variance here. So maybe just thinking around do we know our risks? Do you have someone on the board who maybe has come from a technology background? Do you need someone like that? Or maybe I'm sure people have a network of people, so just reaching out to someone and asking questions. Feel free to send me a message if you need any kind of just quick tips and stuff like that. But it's just looking at, okay, if we only care around regulation, what is our regulatory requirement? What do we need to do as a minimum? And looking at it like that, I recognise that everyone's going to be different and on different journeys within that. That's the same no matter what sector you look at. So I completely take on that point.
Thank you. In key risks, should we also consider the difficulty of supply risks such as obsolete APIs and technology obsolescence?
Yeah, definitely. So when we're talking about that attack service, so APIs, for anyone who's not got a technology background, that's basically just connecting to different systems. That could be from either a supplier, you could have your systems connecting internally as well. So yes, anything that is connecting from the out, that's definitely an attack surface that someone could connect into. You could have a middleman attack where someone comes in and you think it's from your supplier, but actually it's a malicious attacker. So I agree with that. You should be looking at any technology that you are using as well as connecting in from a third party.
I've got a question here saying, I've been advised that I do not need anything else if I have Malwarebytes. Is that something that you would agree with?
It's difficult to say without knowing your school in more detail. But I would say, so I'd still be looking at cyber resilience, and actually if you are attacked, are you prepared for that attack? So just considering around that, but it's very, very difficult to say. My opinion would be no. I think you still need to have some controls, understand your risk, rather than just relying on a technology. We tend to say with everything, it's about the people, the processes and technology. So you've got the technology or a technology, but actually, do you understand the processes that you're going to go through if you have a cyber attack, and who are the people, who owns the risk, thinking about things like that. And that just might be a conversation about, okay, so cyber risk, in which committee, if you might have one, but you might have a few different committees. So where are you going to discuss this?
Thank you. A question coming in, I realise that this is specific to the school setting and outside of your role at PwC, but can you comment on concerns around cyber-related safeguarding threats, sexual abuse, harassment, grooming, etc., and how we can protect people's in school and at home?
Yeah, so it is a bit out of my comfort zone. I think the cyber choices probably will inform a bit more around that, but I definitely think it is a big threat with regards to safeguarding, and how can you look at bullying, sexual harassment, all of those different things. And even we're seeing with younger kids, so if we're looking at primary schools now, younger kids are getting phones. So how can you see that, have they got social media accounts, all of those different things, that there is a verification to say that you're a certain age, but actually it's very, very difficult to verify that someone is a certain age. You just tick a box at the moment, which ideally we wouldn't want to do, but I work in identity and access management, and actually verifying people's identity is very, very difficult. So do 10-year-olds have passports and driving license and things like that you tend to use as a verifier of their information? It's a difficult thing. And when you get to kind of global, obviously people have different documents, so it's a complex issue. But if I just, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent there, but if I go back to your point, I definitely think that needs to be considered, and that's kind of going between like the resources that you have and going to that pupil angle of thinking about, how do we use this to safeguard? What do we need to educate both our teachers as well as our pupils to make sure that we are protecting them as best we can? I think that's a really, really important issue. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to give more on that. but it's something that I think needs to be considered.
No, thank you. That's really, really helpful. And just to reiterate, in the email that we'll send out following the session, we'll have Amelia's kindly provided links to the National Crime Agency has developed lots of e-learning and resources on their website for students and younger children to help sort of build their knowledge in cybersecurity. That's a really good place to start to make sure are we utilising that in our schools. What does cyber security look like? Education look like in our schools? Are we giving our young people and students the knowledge that they need to keep themselves online? Also to help mitigate, with all the background work that we do to help mitigate that risk, as school governors and leaders on the call today. One last question for the question here is about, in your work at PwC, are you ever contacted by individual schools or academies to provide support for ransomware attacks? Is that anything that's happened in your experience?
So I don't sit in the incident response team. Obviously we're a global organization. I would be very surprised if we haven't. I've worked with a lot of universities, and I know that obviously they were massively kind of targeted. So it definitely does happen in the education sector. I couldn't give you numbers, but I could probably go away and talk to my threat intelligence team and get probably statistics quite quickly. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but I can assume whether that's us or another one of kind of the cybersecurity. There's many different cybersecurity consultants and organizations. I can imagine it probably happens more than is in the press.
Thank you very much. I think that is all the questions that we've got in the question and in the questions in the Q&A section on the website, in the Zoom webinar, I should say. So yeah, unfortunately, we're not able to just reiterate, because we've got a couple of questions around the slides. We're not able to share the slides today, but the session has been recorded. It will be available to watch back, and you'll receive an email once it's been uploaded. It will go onto our website. So please do share it with fellow governors, as I think we can all agree there's been lots of positive feedback. There's been lots of really, really useful information. And thank you so much, Amelia. It's been absolutely riveting. Really great to my attention at 8 a.m. on a Thursday in late September. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, and there's been lots of positive feedback. I don't know if you've seen, there's been lots of positive feedback for you, Amelia, in the chat. Lots of people have equally found this like really riveting, really useful, really informative this morning. So I think we'll start to wrap the session up there, unless anyone's got any last minute questions they'd like to put. We've got a few minutes left, so I'll just give it a minute or two if anyone would like to put any questions into the Q&A that we can feed to Amelia while we have someone this much knowledge. No, well, I think we'll start to wind it up down there. In terms of, I'd like to thank you once again, Amelia, for coming along and sharing all this information with us today. It's been absolutely fantastic. Today is the penultimate day of our conference here at Governors for Schools. We've got two more sessions that may be of interest to you today. One is on diversifying governing boards, happening this morning, and then we've got a session at lunchtime all about how we professional and personal development that's achieved in the school governance role, with speakers coming in to talk to us about that. We also have, excitingly, one of the things we're really excited about at Government Schools is we're launching a new campaign tomorrow at 4 o'clock, which is all about sort of COVID recovery. So please do join us at 4 o'clock tomorrow to see the campaign launch. I know it's something we're really excited to launch, and my colleague Matt is really excited to run that session for everyone. So please do log into that one. And with that, I think we can finish a few minutes early.